Great. Thank you so much, David, Kathy, everyone, for having us here. This is the third studio we're going to be presenting on for University of Oregon's Urban Design Studio, which happens every spring. And we just love getting the ideas out there and having the conversation and getting a chance to have our students show the work that they're doing. So let me share my screen first. And all right, can someone give me a verbal that you're seeing our screen?
Good to go.
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so again, thank you all for being here and also for the invitation for us to present here. So as mentioned, I'm Nico Larco. I'm a professor of architecture and urban design at University of Oregon. I also run the Urbanism Next Center and the Sustainable Cities Institute. And for those of you who are urban designers on this, which I know there's a lot of, also just published the Sustainable Urban Design Handbook. So love to talk to you more about that if you're interested. What we're going to talk about today is a studio that we did in the spring term. We have the Urban Design Studio at the University of Oregon every spring for graduate students. These are graduate students who are in their first year of a two-year program at U of O. So most of them have not done urban design at all. And so this is their first introduction to urban design. And we're also always super proud of how much they are able to do in a short amount of time. I taught the studio again this year with Laura Lillard and Mark Raggett. They'll introduce themselves as they speak in just a little bit. The studio was focused on this topic that we've got of housing and homelessness in the area, and trying to figure out some different alternatives for how we might be able to deal with that. It was possible in large part because of support from the Goodmans. You can see there in the bottom, and so we're super thankful for their financial support for all this. So the students these are all the students who are in the studio. Not all of them could be here today, but I think we have people from every team here, so we should be able to have you'll be able to see all the different projects. But great mix of students with really a fantastic year that we've had this year. Okay, so the topic really came out of a subject that I feel like is not a surprise to anyone, which is that there's a really large kind of issues with housing and homelessness in the area. As we all know, this creates a huge kind of humanitarian issue, which, a whole lot of unfortunate suffering is happening in the region. It's also a safety issue, both for those who are homeless or houseless and others. And obviously, it's created a lot of economic problems in the area as well. So for all these reasons, there's a lot of interest in trying to figure out what it is that we could be doing to address this topic. The approach that we took was different than some of the things that have happened in the region so far, but not so different than some of the things that are happening in other places in the country. So there's a lot of examples of trying to do this larger scale, providing housing and services together in one area. And, some of these are 50-acre kind of lots that have a combination of these different housing typologies and services all in one place. We were lucky enough to be connected to Central City Concern, and huge thanks to Sean Hubert and Mary Rain over there, who were some of the leaders who helped us throughout the studio. But the program was basically transitional housing, which I'll talk about just a little bit, some affordable housing, some market rate housing, open space, and then this whole range of services, some of them, directed specifically to the people who are being served, the homeless population, and some of them for people outside of that population completely. In terms of the populations that we were working with, it was really this idea of that there's these different, we'll say, cohorts of the homeless. On the one hand, there's something that we hear a lot about, and the Central City Concern has done a fantastic job of helping with this in the region. But these are people who have drug addiction or mental health problems, have histories that make them really difficult to serve to get off the street and then to get into more stable care. But there's also a whole nother population, which, with the studio and with Central City Concern was kind of dubbed the economically homeless. And these are people who don't have mental health issues, don't have drug addiction issues, but simply don't have or don't have the economic means to afford housing in the region. And these are people who many of them have jobs. Some of them are elderly. And so trying to figure out, and this is a really different population than some of the populations that are the harder to serve. You'll hear from the students as they talk about this, different approaches. Some we gave them the option of dealing with both of these populations or one of the populations or the other. So you'll hear a little bit about that. But really trying to understand the mixing and needs and the level of support that's needed for this. In terms of the site, this is a site we worked on. So this is a portion of the Hayden Meadows site, which is all owned by one developer real estate company. All this piece is owned. We limited it to this area that you can see in the red, not counting the big box stores, which now actually this big box store is empty. But there was a whole combination of ideas of ground leases versus more flexibility. To give you context, to make sure you know, this is Delta Park, so huge amount of open space available right here with no connection here. And really important, this we decided on in combination with Central City Concern, that one of the more important things that's needed to have success in these types of developments is having employment nearby. So this was a really great draw in terms of the site. This is all Amazon warehouses. So fantastic employment opportunities for these populations. Obviously, there's some existing big box that are good employment populations, and then there's also really great proximity. So this over here is the Max station, and there are a couple bus lines that go through here. So there you can see the site a little bit more in detail. Most all the buildings were many of the buildings were considered to be easy to be demolished. Some of these are just like vacant pad sites. There are these two hotels, which most projects kept in for land lease reasons and recent investment reasons, and mixes of dealing with, like this property, for instance, this is the old Walmart site, which is now empty, but still leased by Walmart. Proximity to I-5 here, as I mentioned, and yeah, the Delta Park's up there. And with that, I will pass it over to Laura, who was one of the co-teachers in this.
Hi, just to introduce myself, I'm Laura Lillard. I'm a capital project manager at Portland Parks and Recreation. I was really excited to be working on this project with students. And we were really fortunate to get a number of great speakers. For about a week and a half, we did a really intensive sort of work session with a bunch of different speakers. So Nico did mention, we were really helped with Central City Concerns. We had a number of folks that not only came to visit us, but also took us on a tour of the Blackburn Project, which is on 122nd and Burnside. And they were able to go and see how some of those spaces work, understand the project from start to finish, and also speak with some of the residents at the center. We also, of course, met with Kristen Banson, who is the Vice President of Operations for TMT. And even though the site that we were looking at isn't zoned for the types of uses that we envisioned, she was willing to play game with us just based on all of the great functions of the site that Nico just went through, being close to transit, close to jobs, close to Delta Park, having these opportunities with those two hotels that could be thought of in terms of the long-term stay. She was able to sort of give us a picture of the different lease types and different sort of tenant relationships that have been developed over time, and just kind of give the students a picture of the lay of the land in a real way. We met, of course, with Ankrum Moisen, some folks who worked on the Blackburn project who could give us their perspective of it. We also met with folks from the city, Metro, and the county. We got a good look at the Clinton Triangle shelter, and sort of just seeing that real world example to paint a picture and help us, again, just like with Central City Concern, develop and really hone in on the program and the types of spaces that work well. So kind of getting a little bit of lessons learned from those folks. Talked to Homer Williams. We also got a few project examples that Julie Livingston and Tony Bernal brought to us from Home Forward and Transition projects. So looked at the site of New Columbia, and even though that's a little bit older, the site is quite large. And so Julie really was able to give us sort of the kind of the way that they approached that site, and really re-looked at the existing infrastructure, the roads, how they worked into the phasing of that project, just to give the students a good idea of how that might work. And then this studio also has a great relationship with Gale Associates. And so we were able to not only hear from Sophie and Laura I guess the week that we were doing sort of an intensive lecture series from our great guest speakers, but they were also in regular conversations with the students as they developed their programs and their plans. And I do want to say that all of these guests were invited to, and many of them came to not only the midterm, but the final. So they were really with us the whole way, shaping what came out of the studio, which was fantastic.
And that's something that we like to do a lot at U of O and the Urban Design Studios, that we obviously have a lot of guests who are designers, but also people who are not designers, which relates a whole lot to how urban design happens in the real world. So with that, I'll pass it on to Mark.
Hi, everybody. Mark Raggett. I'm an urban designer and planner with GBD Architects, and I was one of the co-teachers here with Nico and Laura. And my job here is to sort of talk quickly, which I'm good at doing, about an exhaustive sort of existing conditions analysis here, looking at the site, sort of a whole host of issues. I sort of boiled it into like 8 or 9 sheets, but there's sort of the students did an amazing job sort of looking at the site and assessing it according to a whole host of sort of economic, social, cultural, sort of open space and physical sort of attributes. So again, Nico kind of said kind of quickly, this is sort of a placing the site in context, the dark gray lines there. One of them moving east-west is the Columbia Slough. The Columbia River is to the north, that's Hayden Island. You can see that the site in that red, is sort of at the convergence of MLK coming up at the I-5 freeway and interstate, sort of all sort of coming together. Like Nico already pointed out, the sport is the sort of Delta Park, but we're kind of in this Columbia Slough area. Sort of next, I guess. Nico already talked about, this is just a figure ground again, just to give you a sense of, this is sort of a big box sort of shopping retail, Hayden Meadows sort of area. Again, that's sort of, I think, struggling with sort of its image and its future, which is sort of, I think, part of the reason why I've sort of looked at as a good target for a site. But you can see, again, lots of surface parking lots, lots of big box retail stores, as Nico said. Many of them are sort of vacant, or sort of these parcels are underutilized today. So there's definitely an opportunity. This sort of slide is showing kind of, that said, a few of the bigger boxes kind of to the east of the site maybe have active ground leases right now, and we're sort of not looked at as sort of changing in any dramatic ways. The students kind of worked around many of these. I think that's Lowe's and Dick's Sporting Goods, a couple, and there's another business, I think, up to the top, closer to Delta Park. This is sort of a I'm trying to combine transportation and sort of transit here. You can see the blue line, the site sort of in that light gray area, and the map image to the left, there it is. And sort of the blue lines, we're kind of well served with transit here. The sort of the one road that kind of snakes through the middle of the site, sort of has TriMet bus service on it. We know that we have the Yellow Line Max to the west, just across I-5. That connection was sort of something we talked about a lot with students. It's pretty inhospitable today. This is the PIR station. And sort of how can we improve that? Can we make that feel better for transit riders? Again, given that a lot of this future community might need to use transit, how can we sort of make that feel better to a lot of people? Students, as you can see, did a lot of like existing street sort of studies on the right. And then again, as Nico said, we are proximate to the I-5 freeway. You can see it in the far left here. There's sort of some ramps coming off for various destinations, Delta Park, Marine Drive. You can see there's a sort of green space in between sort of the freeway, its ramps, and sort of the site. And that green space was, again, looked at sort of very interestingly by many of the students. I think most of the students groups sort of looked at potentially considering that as an open space amenity, an environmental resource, and or sort of an active transportation trail facility, of which we have a number of them in the area already today. And maybe with the future IBR project, some of those connections are going to get better, feel safer. We students also stepped back and looked at history, so all the way back to kind of tens of thousands of years ago when we had Native American sort of population sort of along the Columbia River and in this area along the slough. Also moving forward to kind of, again, this sort of Portland's racial history sort of in this area that has included sort of the Japanese internment jumping off point, sort of the Expo Center today, the Black community in Vanport next. And again, the floods and sort of the repercussions of sort of that sort of concentration of that Vanport city that was very short-lived and sort of in the late 40s was flooded. So again, beginning to kind of reckon with sort of that history. What does that mean? What could that mean for future development, et cetera? How to reflect that. And again, sort of thinking about that ecological sort of system that we have here, Columbia River, Columbia River is to the north of this little image, and then the Columbia Slough is the south end. Our site is close to 14 there, Delta Park in the middle, next to I-5. So again, what does that mean to be a part of this ecological, a space that historically flooded with the river as the sort of water level ebbed and flowed in the Columbia? What does it mean to be a part of that system environmentally? How can sort of new development and a new residential community here strengthen that, sort of be a part of that sort of ecological ebb and flow, that seasonal ebb and flow? The students also, like, again, we had some working with Central City Concern and many of the groups that Laura sort of coordinated sort of in terms of us talking to them. The students learned a lot about that lowest bar to entry to housing sort of to this site. And so they looked at a few case studies. I just selected a couple of them here. This is the Community First Village in Texas that again has, roughly 50 acres, which is in the ballpark of our site size. I think you can see a comparison in the purple magenta there to kind of our site. But again, thinking about placemaking, sort of different types of transitional housing, from micro units, micro homes, to sort of maybe smaller transitional structures. What are the community gathering places? What are the right numbers in terms of those clusters of units? What are the shared facilities like? This is one. Next is, I think, the Clinton Triangle. So this is one we have in Portland. It's not too far away. This is the intersection of the rail line that you see there. Powell Boulevard goes through at the bottom. Yeah, there's Powell, and the rail line, the Max or Orange line to Milwaukee is right there, as well as the Union Pacific. This is sort of a Portland example. It has, I think, it looks like, what does it say? 100 today, maybe expandable to 160. So again, how are these laid out? How do you think about integration of these types of services and these types of communities with the traditional? Again, the students also sort of thought about the traditional pieces of street design, active transportation, a mixture of housing types, placemaking, those kinds of stuff, and how do those opportunities integrate with some of this lowest bar to entry? And that's, I think, all I had.
Yeah, and if I can add, so as Mark mentioned, students did, as a entire studio, did analysis on all these different topics, and I think we have like 120 different sheets that they came up with and shared, which were the basis of a lot of the work. And I will be posting that soon onto our website so that you can have access to that. So with that, we're going to move on to projects. Each student team has I'll say at about 5 minutes, I'm going to interrupt and tell you that you've got about a minute or two left, so we can make sure that we get through everyone. We have 5 different teams, and with this, I don't know who is going to be speaking, but I will pass it over to you. Dane, Nicole, Fatima, Andres.
Yeah, thanks,
Okay, go ahead.
Nico. We were really excited about this project. It was a great opportunity, and a lot of that research the class cross collaborated on. So my name is Nicole Stout. I'm here with Dane, and we have 2 team members that could make it today, Andres and Fatima. It's a great transition for a lot of the street presence of Hated Meadows itself. There are a lot of blind facades, impermeable and unactivated spaces that we were looking to address. So some of the things that we wanted to bring to the site, as well as emphasize, was creating place by addressing the points of entry and the introductory points, establishing more frequent bus stops, a safe and bikeable, walkable greenway, pickup drop-off zones, shared transit hubs, like biking and scooters. That's something that's really popular out in Portland. And then establishing places for community gathering with shared public zones, and intentionally programmed corridors across the site. So you can see some of our approaches to these solutions by looking at the few bus stops that were in between the connection to that Max line, and a few of the destination attractors of big box stores.
Nicole, let me know when you want me to advance slides. I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, absolutely. These were translated pretty directly to some of our site strategies. We were looking to establish an identifiable greenway route for people for biking, the bus stops, driving as well. Through that, we were identifying the destinations between the site edges and boundaries, that being the green spaces, Delta Park, creating connective corridors across the site, and then programming the corridors by activating the street edges and the public space. You can advance.
So we started programming these corridors with commercial, civic, and residential areas, and that was all going to be interconnected with the green loop. In the commercial, we have a dense corridor that's at least a 1 to 2 street to building height ratio, with restaurants and stores lining on the street edges. In the civic corridor, it's an open nature plaza that has a direct connection into Delta Park. It's home to a school, library, and other civic resources. And then in the residential corridor, we envisioned it as around a 1-to-1 ratio, where it builds up a quiet pedestrian walkway with small-scale mixed-use programs in between. That's all interconnected by the extensive green loop network, which acts as a buffer, providing safer layered pedestrian zones at the street edge. Next slide. You can sort of see those start to manifest in the site there with each corridor. And that's how the street block structure was built. And we sort of started putting in our housing elements based around those corridors from there, putting in townhomes, row homes, multifamily homes, market rate apartments, SROs, and co-ops. And we kind of started asking ourselves, how's that all going to happen? And on the next slide. So that sort of starts with phase one, where we wanted to do this low barrier to entry housing development, where we started with a safe park RV lot that would have shared amenities to the north. And then down on the south is a pod community, which has a bunch of shared amenities as well with community spaces. And this is all on top of a bit currently abandoned structures and empty parking lots at the southwest corner of the site. To the right is phase
And just
two.
to orient people, sorry, this is the area that we're talking about there, and then you talked about the area up there.
Phase two is right in the heart of the project. It's infilling underutilized parking lots and right in front of businesses with currently terminating leases. And those are tiny home developments and SROs with a proposed little plaza and grocery store in the Dick's Sporting Goods parking lot that would start to generate that community on two ends of the site. Next slide. So between all of that, it sort of fills itself out where we have the commercial area down to the southwest of the site, and that goes up to the Civic Plaza, which is right at the heart of the site, connecting straight into Delta Park. And then over to the east, northeast, we have the residential zone, which is a little bit more quiet and has smaller mixed use developments in there. Next. We pride ourselves on using some of these fundamentals where we implemented dense block structures, missing middle housing, green stormwater management, buffered pedestrian routes, diverse transit networks, and bridging ecological fragments to generate healthier and more sustainable community. Each of those are sort of littered throughout the project at a smaller scale. It just takes a long time to get through each one of them. Next.
This aligned pretty closely with our street hierarchies and the way that we imagined people would transverse through the site. We had a main arterial that had a protected green corridor, so we really wanted to buffer out the pedestrian and bikeways, as well as provide spaces for the street parking, as we were getting rid of a lot of those parking spaces. And then our secondary roadways or commercial streets being at a closer quarter, you could get the streeteries and experience where you are looking across and down on the site. Next slides. These would just be some of those experiential moments, being able to move through those areas as well as connect to some of the plazas. Then our tertiary and upper portion being comprised of home zones, ideas of slower streets, streets that might be paved differently, have slower zones or even no cars at all, as well as a boardwalk that would happen up on the Delta corner. These are a little bit more about how you would experience that on the site.
And we're just past 5 minutes now, so you know. Oh, perfect.
Great.
Perfect.
Which means we timed it just well.
Perfect. Great. So we'll set to the next group. And one of the things I just want to bring up is that for many of the students, one of the ideas was, how do you integrate these kind of harder to serve? You saw in phase one communities versus the affordable housing and market rate housing. So as the teams talk about their projects, you can also point that out, because that might be harder for people to pick up on. So Mar, Emma, Nick.
Thanks, Nico. I'll kind of kick it off for our group. Yeah, I'm Emma Gabriel, and then I'll be presenting with my two partners on the project, who are Nick Hodge and Mariella Hirshoff. Sorry. Go on to the next slide here. So kind of like the last group, we started the project by kind of creating maybe our stars, or like North Star for the project that we continue to check in on. So we had these kind of 4 leading project goals that we always tapped into. The first being kind of capitalizing and expanding on those existing site resources that Mark and Nico talked about in the beginning. We also found it important to establish a sense of visual clarity and identity. A lot of that inspiration coming from the Blackburn Center and those tours we took early on in the quarter. We thought it was important to establish a network of diverse nodes and neighborhoods. And then also throughout the development, creating kind of a range of permeability and having that kind of goal be applied in different kind of facets throughout. Okay, sorry. So then that kind of informed our urban party. So we started by establishing kind of 3 neighborhoods, which were based on service needs. So like a high service need on the south side of the site, medium in the center there, and then a low service need on that northern edge. And this came from a lot of we heard from Central City Concern that people typically were more successful when they were like around and surrounded by people who were in similar stages of their kind of transitional housing journey. And then we also established kind of 2 primary axes that connected to those important site resources. And then layering it on top of that, each of those kind of neighborhoods we established, each got their own kind of like community heart, and that was, we saw as like different applicabilities.
And then sorry,
Sorry,
could you
go
go
ahead.
back quick? Yeah, no,
Yeah.
good. And then on the right is our illustrative plan, which took the ideas from the urban party and started to inform our massings. And you can see where Delta Park is up on the north side, and to the south is where the Columbia Slough Trail is, and to the west where the Max and I-5 is. And one of the main things is we kind of infilled a lot of the surface parking lots. So we proposed a parking garage. And then in our main heart, you can see we proposed a primary health facility, and we located senior housing near it, since we're aware that seniors are an increasingly a population that's at risk and experience homelessness. And then we also proposed a grocery store and thought about the way we would orient our massings located to Delta Park.
So we started following these earlier studies. We looked at our goals and thought about housing typologies. So we studied a variety of things and tried to design them based on service need. And this isn't like, I guess what we were trying to understand through this, or what we ended up understanding after the study, was that different housing typologies worked for different service needs. So we kind of landed on like a housing is not one size fits all, both for the service need level and for the individuals. There may be different typologies that work better for different users, and we shouldn't try to ascribe like just say parking and prefab to like a high need Clinton Triangle style of housing, whereas like as you progress in your journey, you only get in a 5-story multifamily building. So that's kind of the lesson we learned from that. And then we tried to think about adjacencies and how these things might interact with each other. So that's explored in the block studies on the right. And we thought it was critical to ensure that the service need level that we are thinking about in the party that you just saw on the last slide, we wanted to make sure that was not reflected in the built environment. We wanted everyone to be living in the same high quality neighborhood, but we like wanted to embed this understanding that different groups need different things in their actual housing, but yeah, just not necessarily reflected.
And then our community hearts that we established the 4 hearts. And our first one on the left is what we called the gateway, which was the main entry to the site through all modes of transportation, and it sets the visual tone identity for the rest of the site. And it features large gathering space with indoor and outdoor community spaces and restrooms. The intention was that these spaces would be used both by residents of the site, but also public that is visiting and utilizing Delta Park.
The next part there is what we were calling as like Meadow Commons. This is at the end, the intersection of those two primary kind of axes that we established. So we knew that this was going to be kind of an important moment for the project. So as Mark kind of touched on with the illustrative plan, we had it be kind of where site amenities that were needed for everyone across the site. So primary health, the primary like retail corridor, the grocery store, and also being kind of close to the existing retail, we kind of built off of all of that. Then the next part, the one in the second middle one, yes, that one, we refer to as Delta Crossing. This is where that the site kind of started to blend with Delta Park right ahead. Key takeaways for this is we wanted to build off of the energy that existed at Delta Park, but also understanding the massing kind of still reflected an inward language, because we still knew that this is a vulnerable group and population, and it is still important to focus on kind of like that internal community as well.
Then our final heart was, which we called the garden, which was located in the high need area. And we focused on integrating community gardens, especially as this population is starting to learn how to do some of these things again. We thought it would be a good idea for them to take care of gardens while they work on their journey towards independence. And we also offer some support spaces, and it's also located near an educational job training facility, which is support needed for this population.
Great. And that we're just about at 5 minutes, so I don't know how many more slides you have.
Yeah, I think we're close to the end, so we can wrap this up quickly. This was like this is the high need, the first phase. So we would propose happen tomorrow. It's at the southwest of the site, and the placement was kind of based on a trauma-informed choice of space research. Not in the center of activity. Residents can leave if they feel like they need a break. And our main takeaway from this was, instead of traditional corner commercial, we were interested in exploring corner service. So pushing the services to the edge of the block would break up the fence that's required in some of those spaces like Clinton Triangle, in a way just to make it feel more integrated with the whole community.
This is just quick phasing how we would think about the site.
And then we've got one last slide. It's also quick. It's just some of the street types we explored, and from left to right were highest activity, lowest activity. And the main thing was that on the far right is what we called the green alley, and that connected all of the communities and went through the high need phase one that we showed 2 slides ago. But that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much. That's great. Dorian, Misha, and yeah, I think Misha is, I don't remember who's here. Is anyone here for this one? No?
There we go. Yep, we're here. Sorry, give
Okay,
us a
great.
minute. Okay, there we go. So, hello, I'm Misha, and this is Yen. All right. So our project thought of this whole location as using the term of a sojourn, which is a temporary state or journey, which we thought was impactful because this was going to be for people transitioning through different levels of housing and different integrations into community. And it would allow you to take things one step at a time. We did also want to make spaces that made strong identity for the different locations. Yen, you want to talk about the intro or the welcoming pavilion?
We'll jump right into next.
Okay, go to the next slide, I guess. Also, we wanted to, for sustainability on the site, we leaned heavily on reuse and repurpose. Many of the buildings from the land active ground leases that have the longest ground lease are also the largest buildings and the most material inputs currently on the site. And so to be just to help with efficiency, we tried to keep as many of those as possible so that the site used as little new resources as possible. And in the bottom, we ended up keeping, I missed one, but basically all the large existing buildings we were able to keep in place and just repurpose and use for the new space planning. And then, Yan, you wanna?
Yeah, so I'll talk about a little bit of the zone and zoning. So on the left bottom corner, there's a pink stripe, pink core that is more represented like a hotter area that is more commercial. And sorry, the bottom left.
The full left picture. Yeah, there you go.
The yellow, and there's the two different residential area that is more, one is more towards I-5 and one is more towards the MLK that has different property. And we figure out that it could be a more interactive neighborhood and the right hand could be a more quiet neighborhood. And I want to talk about.
So yeah, we kind of on the two diagrams there on the left, we saw that, yeah, that commercial strip now goes through the center. And that's where the big buildings are to anchor. And then on the left side, there is a slot that is right direct to mass transit and the green space. That's a transit oriented. And then to the north, there's a site that comes up that's oriented towards the park. And then also on the east side of the site in general, either through landscape features or other zoning features, you have a hard boundary, and then the park faces on the west do a permeable boundary. So you have different privacy and openness characteristics to the site, which kind of then in the big diagram, we saw that we could have three neighborhoods more or less in the site with a central core and then two different residential sites on either side. So, well, and then also for the highest needs area, that yellow area we call the breakwater. We put the highest needs there because the sight lines are natural privacy lines, but it has a direct connection to the park and to main thoroughfares. And also we were mindful of the trauma that a lot of individuals at the site may have experienced in the past. And so we wanted to, within our neighborhoods, orient residential spaces around green spaces and then allow the service buildings to be the connection of green spaces as well as the bridges between neighborhoods so that when you met new people, it was always in a public and open space or a service space where you felt safe. And then you could go back to your own neighborhoods if you were wanting more security. And so that's kind of the two squares on that left diagram show the service bridging. Next to that is kind of just a general flow of how you would kind of layer housing, green space, and service centers for more service to less service. And then on the right is just a diagram of green spaces and how they interact with our pedestrian paths through the area. And then how on the top, the blue is the service buildings and how those also interact with the pedestrian spaces. Just as
You
a
guys are
general
5
layout.
minutes. You're actually 5.5
Okay.
minutes right now. So we
All
should
right.
be.
So we can, this is kind of phase one is the tiny homes and the high needs. And it worked out that those spaces are mostly vacant now. So that's where we thought they should be, but it was also good because those could be moved in right away. Then we can go to the next one. And here's our for the most service oriented, we were going to redo a building up at the top for health services. So it had a front porch to it with a deck. And then there's a green space you can see towards the top of the pods and a green space in the bottom of the pods so that you could have yards. And again, this is the enclosed space with one access, but we're just using adjacent buildings and hard lines of parking lots or wild spaces to define that without the fence being the defining nature of that site. And there's a community building as well up front for that. And then SROs, we put SROs with various levels of tiny homes. And similarly, on the right is our diagram of our pedestrian or green path that goes through the SROs and connects to tiny homes at the bottom. So you're able to walk through these neighborhoods with interlapping public spaces.
We're about time, so
All right, and
we
this
should
is the
wrap it up.
last one. This is the tiny homes with the central space. Oh, and then there's one more slide that we can see. And then also we also wanted to keep that connection to Delta Park. So we had a sports street park that would allow you to go straight from Delta Park into the neighborhood with many play areas on either side of the street and very open and pedestrian friendly. Oh, and then go one, yeah, and then that's what that would look like for 3D.
Great.
Thank
you
you.
all. And Justin, Michael, Zoe.
All right. Hello, my name is Justin Smith. I had the pleasure and privilege of working with Michael Salerno and Zoe Luke. And we titled our project Gathering Delta Park. And that was really our driving concept for this project. And these are kind of our concept diagrams where we wanted to create a similar language built throughout the development. And at the top is Delta Park, which is a successful space that has 300,000 annual visitors. But no real infrastructure to support it. So we wanted to create community services, but also supportive services, both for the people of our development and the visitors of Delta Park. Next slide. So in terms of our illustrative plan, we started at the south side with 150 pods as a minimal infrastructural intervention addition to the existing site. Off of that, we'll build up the commercial center, building along Delta Park. And then phase 3 begins to build off of that further with the more community focused supportive services. For our roads and pathways, we started with North Whitaker Road, which is the road between the 5 and our development. We wanted to create a larger buffer to reduce the noise pollution for those residences on the west side. Our main residential street, which is the middle one, we wanted to create these human scaled streets that were comfortable to bike down, to ride down, to walk down. And create these neighborhoods that are still dense enough to get us to the unit count that we wanted. And then on the right is our main commercial street. So that's down the middle of our site, running from what we called our central node all the way down to the bottom on the south side. And we were inspired by the Mississippi district in Portland and the feel of that street and walking down it. So the first of the 3 areas that we focused on was the community node. This is at the north side of our development, right along Delta Park. So again, there's 300,000 people who visit Delta Park annually, but there's no place for them to eat after soccer games. There's no place for to get snacks or to meet as a team. So we wanted to create a spot that could build off of that momentum, but also be used by the community itself. So this is our retail corridor, but also has outdoor space for anyone in the community to use, whether they live here or visiting here. This is a typical neighborhood block. So again, we wanted to use a shared language throughout. So while the community has access to Delta Park as a whole, these neighborhoods have an outdoor space that they can call their own at a neighborhood scale. So on the left side is that commercial corridor running down with resident on the top. On the right side are multi-story residential buildings, and they form this inner courtyard in the middle that again is a shared backyard meant for the residents of just this block to use. So again, scaling down that language on multiple scales. Lastly was our pod community, and this, in all honesty, could have been a urban design studio within itself. We really tried to apply all the principles that we applied to our larger development in here. So in these pods, which are meant for the highest service need, we have services directly available within these communities. But then additionally, we built these little neighborhoods of 8 pods each. And one small move that we did that we believed gave some sense of ownership was these different colored patios, so that you could say, oh, I live in this neighborhood in the greenhouse, or I live in the orange house. And this small move gives people a much greater sense of ownership and dignity of their space. But then additionally, we borrowed other design elements such as the outdoor space for the blocks, or the paving from the nodes. So again, just scaling down different elements at every stage of the project. So that was very quickly a look at the exploration we had in this studio.
Perfect timing. That was 5 minutes. Perfect.
All right.
Last one, Caitlin, Kim, and Ray. I think Kim's here, right?
Yes, I am. Hi, I'm Kim Nichols, and Caitlin Owens and Ray McKenna were my partners on this. They are currently in a seminar, so I'll represent everybody. We were initially really interested in sort of the topographic and environmental aspects of this site, partly because it is a site that has vulnerabilities to river flooding. And then we kind of learned during our midterm from the owner of the site that Lowe's and Dick's were not likely to stay with the interventions to the neighborhood. So we ended up taking over a larger portion of the site, including that little horseshoe area just to the right of Lowe's and Dick's. And yeah, you'll see that in our design plan. So we were focusing on 4 main qualities and how to integrate them with our neighborhood design. And those are equity, sustainability, community, and accessibility. And we define what each of those things means for us. We wanted to make a grid structure that was easy to navigate and had a really good hierarchy and a lot of private spaces. We wanted a good community connection, and we wanted a big community connection and to draw on the energy of Delta Park. So you see us pulling from Delta Park at the top and concentrating our sort of commercial restaurant district around that area, so that we're providing an amenity for Delta Park, but also creating a really active space in the neighborhood for our folks to go. South of that, we have a more equity focused area where it's more about a kind of a free zone of libraries, school, community center, those sorts of activities. And I'll also say we focused more on families and the economically disadvantaged as opposed to folks who had other needs for this particular project, because we were told it was hard to focus on both. On the right, you just see our street hierarchy of where the bigger streets are. So where we're sort of focusing and pulling cars through, to smaller streets to, at the very lightest, the light peach are just vehicle access areas for parking. Next slide. Our first phase in here was providing a transitional tiny home area. And Ray McKenna worked really hard on this design and wanted to first keep the current Hayden Meadows Road. It has a lot of really beautiful mature trees along it, and wanted to keep it as a green space, which in the first phase would stay as a street, but in the second phase would turn into a linear park. And then each of the pods was focused around creating like their own front porch. So they each had a sense of privacy, and then these communal spaces in the center, and providing amenities sort of on the west side by Whitaker Boulevard as a buffer. So that includes like a community center, smoking area, dog park, those sorts of things. Yeah, this is good. So this is a zoom in of the tiny homes, and you can see, especially in the middle image, they each have those white porches, and they're trying to activate the streets. So they're facing each of the streets here. And then we provide, yeah, just streets with lots and lots of trees to slow down traffic and to provide really nice green space there. You can go to the next slide. This is our connection to Delta Park, and this was designed as like almost a play space because the folks in Delta Park don't really have that. It's more for older kids playing sports, into this sort of food court area and central area that comes down. And this is where our main street turns and also has a bike area. So that's kind of the linear connection there. This last area, I should have shown a better plan for this, but this is that horseshoe area that used to be Speedway, and it's kind of Speedway Park. So it used to be the old horse racing track there, I think, and it's a depression already. And we wanted to lean on that to turn it into a green space, which focuses on water treatment and being a flood zone for potential river flooding. And this area is lined by townhouses. So we have townhouses in a lot of different places, and we wanted to provide affordable options at every different scale. So if you wanted to be in a tiny home or an apartment, that there's a range of those from market rate to transitional housing. And these are our three main street designs of the different scales. So the first one is kind of our main commercial area where that's connecting to the park. So it's a larger street. There's a full bikeway, pardon me. And that's where the schools are and the access to that space is. On the right is what the streets look like around where the townhouses are. So they're narrow and people can go next to each other, and there's parking on both sides. And then the smallest street, people really have to pull over to let another person pass, and there's more limited parking.
That's it. So I'll say thank you all for the fantastic work and for the presentations. Really appreciate this from all the students. I think some of the big lessons learned, which hopefully you all, I'm going to stop sharing here, hopefully you all got a sense of, is this idea of trying to mix different populations, different housing typologies, which have a whole lot of really different needs. Also, this mixing of people who are recently homeless with just people, everyday people. So like a lot of the idea of how to bring in Delta Parks, which I think would be really good for Delta Parks as a parent who spent way too much time over there, but also really good of this idea of just being exposed to people in these different situations. Obviously, a lot of the development of public space as a huge medium for that. And also this idea of dignity. You saw in some of the schemes like this idea of even if you had, places that had to be walled off because of security concerns, that those spaces inside still had some of the same type of public spaces that you were seeing on the outside. So there's this idea of, and we were really fortunate to have some people who had previously been homeless who came not only to talk to the students, but also were on reviews. And that I think resonated a whole lot. So I realized that went a little bit longer than we had hoped to, but I'm happy to answer any questions or point to students. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask.
Before we do that, because some people will be dropping off, I just want to remind everyone that they can get CE credit, and to look at the chat, I've put in the links of where you need to go.
Okay. Thanks, Kathy. Wow, this was very thoughtful. There was a lot of themes that I caught throughout the way, and we are running out of time. So if you do have to go, please recognize that this is a recording. You can follow up later if you want to see it again. But David has a question related to the presentations. Is there a theme or thread throughout the public open spaces that can overcome stigmas of high need housing in the mixed development? Nico, you started to touch a little bit on that.
Yeah. Do any of the students want to talk about this? Justin, I think your scheme really worked on that a lot. If you want to mention some of that.
Yeah. There's a lot of strategies that we explored. in this studio, and a lot of that was informed by the discussions we had with the various groups, whether they be Central City Concern or people with lived experience. And I think one approach that we as a group took, but then multiple groups took, was addressing, the common, what we have in common as humans. We all live, we all recreate, we all exist in these communities, but creating a shared space where we can address the needs of people um, as they are, meeting people where they're at, but also giving them an opportunity to move forward and provide that path forward. So those are some of the explorations that we had in this studio.
Yeah, and I'll say a lot of the open spaces also, and this was again talking to people, both centrally concerned and then also people who had been homeless, was this idea of being able to be in public, but also being able to retreat and watch the public, or being able to retreat and just have your own spaces. So you, in a lot of the public spaces, you saw these kind of different scales of engagement, and letting people have, there's a big an ongoing thing of like letting people choose how much they wanted to be exposed, depending on how comfortable they were or weren't. That was, I thought you saw that a lot.
Yeah, that was the matter. Go ahead.
Are there any of the students who want to chime in on some of their approaches? Nope.
No, but
Okay.
So a couple comments are, so someone has a comment. There was some groundwork laid early in the presentation establishing some of the baseline and history. Was there any relationship or themes that came out of early Indigenous peoples in the former Vanport development? Did those histories influence or play a role in some of the concepts?
Do any of the students or Laura or Mark want to answer that?
I can give it a little bit of a go, and part of it was emphasizing the cultural care. So it wasn't so much bringing up the history as trying to change the sort of colonial ideas of the culture and emphasizing care for people. Our project was really trying to give people what we called walking loops and nature, and trying to protect nature and be more of a steward.
Yeah, there's I feel a little bit bad that we've had like 6-7 minutes for each
I know.
scheme, but there's a ton of information in each one of these where a lot of the students went into much more depth about this. We do have a report that's been put together, and that I will be posting shortly on our website. Maybe I can send that to UDP and we can share it with everyone who is part of this.
Yeah.
Great, that was going to be a question. Go ahead, David.
Oh, I was just going to say, obviously, we're going to, including myself, lose folks who have obligations here. It's 1:03 p.m. And that, like my question and all of these questions are really loaded with, 1 hour discussion behind each one. I think it's really, what was obvious to me from the presentations was that that level of thought, Nico, that was put into it, and some levels of discovery. So even like jaded professionals out there in the trenches every day trying to work on urban design, this kind of sense of discovery, some of the points you were making about the neighborhoods, the students were making about neighborhoods, and kind of they choose the access to public space from their space. That's a very good thing to kind of simplify and keep in mind, I thought. Otherwise, I don't know how long folks are going to want to stay on, but I'm going to have to jump off right now.
So if I could just make one last point.
Yes,
one of the
please.
things that we were hoping that would happen in doing this work is getting the conversation within the Portland region about this approach, this type of approach to housing. Right now, we've got a scattered site approach, which if you talk to a lot of the providers, is a little bit of a really difficult to deal with, especially for people who need services. And so the idea of thinking about a larger scale site where we have housing and services together, I think is one of the things that we're really interested in. The reason I think that we're going to be doing this the studio again that looks at these topics. So for those of you who are part of those conversations regionally, we would love to be talking to you. We have this work that hopefully can help along with this, and I think it's something that would be really helpful for our entire region.
Sure thing. You've landed probably in one of the most difficult. So I can give you some notes from the west side in terms of the very thing you just described, Nico, and some of the challenges and maybe opportunities. I see Eugenia is here today, Eugenia. So hi, Eugenia. Just the paint's still drying on a wonderful affordable housing project here in Hillsborough. But we really do appreciate it. I don't think there's any easy way to kind of wrap this up other than to go for another hour, which we won't be able to do. So thank you, Jeremy, for helping with the Q&A, and Nico and all students, Justin, everybody. That was really great. Good job on doing it in a Pecha Kucha kind of fashion, right? 6 minutes per presentation is brutally short in order to do so, but just know that your work comes through in the drawings. That's the one thing we can always rely on as a universal language is your drawing work, and the three-dimensional stuff is valuable. The street sections and all that are, I think, great and greatly important to learn, and nice job on sort of having the students go through the different approaches to drawings, Nico.
Great. Thank you all for having us. And remember, all these students are going to be graduating in just a few months. So for those of you who have offices and need some fantastic talent,
we know where to look. All right, great. Well, we have more upcoming in the next few months from the Urban Design Panel. So we look forward to having you all here. So on behalf of the executive committee and everybody today, thank you so much. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.
thank you all.
Good job. Thank you.